Recording. So we will explain how to write a will that will be in accord with the laws of the Torah. V'gam yitba'aru bo odinim hanogim l'chiluk izavono shel ha'adam. We will also explain other aspects of how to divide your trust so that it's divided well after you pass away. Shraga Feivel Cohen or Khan was the mechaber of the Sefer Badei, the Sfarim of Badei HaShulchan, which are used widely today. Those of you who are in the Smichas Chaver program may know that we have quoted from the Badei HaShulchan quite frequently in that program. But when we're doing Hilchos Nida, it's probably his most famous Sefer. He only recently passed away, Rav Khan. Big Talmud Chacham. Okay, so let's take a look. Perek Aleph. Matarat hakuntrus hanochachi. The objective of this kuntrus, of this composition. Matarato shel hakuntrus hazeh hi liftor baya hametzuya me'od biyamenu. Where our goal is to try and resolve a problem that is prevalent in our times. Vizeh to'ara, and this is it. He says this is the description. Hinei baTorah b'Sefer Bamidbar kapitel Chav Zayin. He says the Torah in the book of Bamidbar, chapter 27, Heichel mi pasuk vav, starting with pasuk vav, nitparesh seder hanachala bi'izavono shel ha'adam sheshavak chayim l'chol chay, which really creates serious problems for every single individual, because the way that the Torah organizes the prioritizations of inheritance really do not leave a lot of room for most family situations. Let's take a look at the book of Bamidbar for just a second and see what it says. Take a look at Sefaria. That's the quickest way to get it. And I'll share my screen in just a second. Said it was Chav Zayin, right? Okay, this should be familiar to us. This is the story of the daughters of Tzalafchad. They came to Moshe and they wanted to inherit a portion in the land of Eretz Yisrael. What? Actually, I'm not sharing the screen. So let's share the screen. So the daughters of Tzalafchad come petition that they want to get a portion of the land. Our father died without any sons. He only has daughters. Okay. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe lemor, God says to Moshe as follows: Cain benos Tzalafchad doveros. The daughters of Tzalafchad are speaking correctly. Nason titein lahem achuzas nachala b'sochachei avihem, that you shall give them a portion. Right, v'ha'avarta es nachalas avihen lahen, and you shall pass their father's portion over to them. Ve'el b'nei Yisrael tadaber le'mor, ish ki amus uvein lo, v'ha'avartem es nachalaso levito. And to b'nei Yisrael you shall say as follows: if a man dies and he has no son, he shall pass his inheritance to his daughter. Ve'imein lo bas, and if he has no daughter, he has no children, so then pass his inheritance to his brothers. And if he has no brothers, then give his inheritance to his uncles, to his father's siblings. And if he has no uncles, then you shall pass the inheritance to his closest relatives. And it shall be for the Jewish people as an eternal a law, as God had commanded to Moshe. So that's what we see as far as the protocols of inheritance. Okay, so now let us go back to our text. He says, so this creates a lot of problems, says Rav Cohen. Uladugma, im hishir acharav beinu vas. So if a man leaves over a son and a daughter, kol izvono livno ve'ein bito yereshes klum. So it turns out that according to the Torah's protocols, a daughter only inherits when there's no sons. So if a man leaves over just two children, a son and a daughter, the son gets 100% of the estate and the daughter gets zero. In chapter 7, we'll list to you the Torah's protocols. I refer you there. Choshen Mishpat Reish Siman Reish Pei Aleph Nisbayer. Shafilu yatne ha'adam beferish shabito tirash oto kivno ein bidvarav klum. The Shulchan Aruch actually makes a shocking statement. It says that even if a person specifies that he wants his daughter to inherit as much as his son, his words are null and void. V'chein hadin b'chol hakedimot liyerusha she'ein biyad hamarish l'shanot klum al yedei tena'av. Similarly, if a person wants to alter any protocols of inheritance by making specifications before he dies, his words are not valid. He says a person can give away as much property as he wants, but only when he's alive. But if a person tries to make a gift of his estate after he's deceased, you can't give it away after you're dead. So, in other words, the moment a person passes away, the Yerusha automatically is divided according to Torah principles, unless a person takes measures before he dies to give away the property before he's dead. De'ein matana la'achar misa, because there's no, like, this is right out of the Gemara. The Gemara says there's no such thing as a gift after death. Kevin shekvar yatsu hanachasim mirushuto, since the assets have already left your possession. Once a person dies, the property no longer belongs to him. It belongs to his heirs. It's an automatic process. It's not a process that takes place through a trust transfer or anything like that. Okay. Va'afilu im kotev hatzava'a Ya'aseh kinyan al hanechasim umatana shehakinyan yachul, or umatne shehakinyan yachul sha'echad kodem mitato. And even when a person writes a will, he'll make a kinyan on his nechasim, and he'll make a stipulation that this kinyan will take place one moment before his death. That, in other words, a second before I die, I want all of my assets to be transferred over as follows, and he states that in his will. Va'az harei hanechasim adayin heim birshuto, teinach demol kinyan zel lenechasim shehem birshuto bishat ktivat hatzava'ah. So that will work. All assets that a testator, is that the right word? That the testator owns at the moment of his death are legally transferred in that 1 second before he dies. But that's only true for assets that he obtains at the time when he makes the kinyan. In other words, in 2023, I make a kinyan that with my lawyer or whoever's writing up my will, I say I'm giving this much to that child, this much to that child, this much to my daughter, because I have a daughter, right? And I'm going to say I want all of this estate that I currently own to be divided among my heirs as follows, and the kinyan shall not take place until 1 second before I die. You can make a kinyan that will only take place in the future. But the kinyan that I'm making in 2023 will not work for any assets that I acquire after 2023. It only works on the assets that I currently own. So let's say I don't die until 2083, halavai, right? Right? So in 2083, I have amassed much more of an estate than I currently own. How can the kinyan that I make in 2023 work for the assets that I acquired much later in life? So that's also part of the problem. You can post-date a kinyan, right? But the kinyan only will cover the stuff that you own when at that time. So that's what we're going to have to figure out how it works. We're going to have to see. That's not going to work. The stuff that you acquire after you make the actual kinyan in 2023. Just like a person cannot transfer property that does not yet exist, you also can't transfer property that you haven't yet acquired. And that's explicit in the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch says that you cannot make a kinyan today, even if you don't want it to create the transfer for another 50 years, but you can't make a kinyan today on something that you haven't yet attained in your possession, right? So therefore, we have to ask the question: so the way that things work today is that you write a will in 2023, and then you write in your will how you want your estate divided. He says, and then everything gets distributed according to your wishes. And there's a concern. Maybe you're committing an act of theft. Maybe you're not committing theft because you're no longer in the world, but maybe whoever's in charge of your estate, maybe Marvin, who's handling your estate, is committing theft. He says, for example, and there, by the way, there have been cases like this where people have gone to Beis Din, right? Guy leaves over a son and daughter. Son says, I'm entitled to the entire estate. My sister gets nothing. She's, after all, just a female, and she's not entitled to anything, according to Torah law. Now, the will states that they divide everything 50-50. So he's accusing his sister of stealing from him. You're a ganaf, okay? V'harei hanachasim shel beno shekain mishpat ha'yerusha v'heim gezel biyad bito. Now it's important to know why the Torah acted in this way. Torah actually is based upon a system of commerce or a societal structure that existed in the ancient world but doesn't exist in the modern world. The Torah was basing the passing of inheritance based on the way the society functioned 3,000 years ago, which was that it was a paternalistic society, male-dominated society, where women did not own anything. Women had no rights. Women had no sense of autonomy other than being subservient to their husbands. The ksuva was instituted after the Torah, like 1,000 years after the Torah was written. But even then, in the times of the Gemara, women still had very few rights, and that's why Chazal stepped in and created the ksuva. They created it for that very reason. They wanted to provide protection, financial protection for a woman. Ksuva started sometime in the Second Temple period. I'm not exactly sure when. Yeah. Yeah, no. The wife gets nothing. That's right. So women are out of the picture. Okay. So you're talking about what are the protections of a wife? Yeah, she gets to live off of the estate as long as she doesn't remarry. Once she remarries, she gets kicked off the estate, right? In other words, she can no longer be a dependent of the estate.
What if she owns on her own? She has her own assets.
Those she gets to keep. But it's not so simple. It's not so simple. In other words, you have to record everything she brings into the marriage with her, has to be recorded in the ksuva. And the husband gets to use those completely and live off of them. Let's say she owns a lot of property because she inherited, let's say she was an only daughter. Talking about biblical law now. A woman is an only daughter. She inherits all of the land holdings of her parents when her parents die. She brings that into the marriage. The husband is the controller now of all. She owns it, but as long as she's married to her husband, she has no rights over it. It's basically hers, but only on paper. And it's only when the husband dies that she gets to take that back. Okay, this is all Torah law.
Who inherits her?
Who inherits her? Her heirs. Her heirs, her children. Her children
Again,
will.
the boys and no
Yeah,
girls.
only the boys and not the girls. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So, but in the most simple example, in the simplest example where a man dies and leaves over a son and a daughter, and let's say there's no wife in the picture anymore, she's either deceased or divorced. So he says the son can accuse his sister of being a gazlan. It's one thing when the son is a mensch and he decides willingly to give his sister half of the estate. Aval b'mikra she'eino mitratzel hazeh, u'motzia mimenu al pi chok hamalchus shetzavaot elu harei sharirim v'kayomim hem b'dinehem. He says, but let's say the will is upheld by the court, which it is in our societies. He's writing this in New York, right? The courts will uphold the will, and he's not happy with only having 50% of the estate. He says, at the end of the day, the sister is a gazlan, because regardless of what is written in the will, if according to Torah law, when the man died, all of his estate was transferred to his son's possession, how can the sister now be taking half of it? And let's say the son is a mensch, but he's not bar mitzvah yet. So he doesn't have the ability even to be moichel. Okay? Then the court is confiscating that which belongs to him. Or let's say another illustration. The man leaves over an heir who's a legitimate son, heir, and in the will, the father says, I'd like you to give 20% of my estate to a certain charity, certain yeshiva. Okay, what right does the yeshiva have to take that money? It belongs to the son. Shahabein einu chayiv l'kayim haneder hazeh, that even if the father made a pledge, and it was a pledge that was made, the son doesn't have to fulfill the pledge. K'moshe Kosav b'tshuvas Rabbi Akiva b'simin kuf mem vav ayin sham. O b'mikra shahabeinu katan ein lito mimenu latet litzdaka. Certainly, if the child is a minor, how can you take away the money from the estate and give it to charity? The gambazeh yesh chashash shel geza. That also creates a problem of theft. Zohi habaya shehizkarnu b'tchilat devarim. So this is what we wanted to present. This is the most straightforward dilemma that a person is faced with when trying to structure a will and make sure that after he dies, his estate is divided according to his wishes. A living will, you mean a medical directive? It's a totally different area of halacha, but it's medical, medical halacha. Yeah, right. So a parent does have a right to direct what their wishes are as far as how they want to be treated while they're still alive. That doesn't involve the estate at all. That's not a question of the estate. But yes, of course, within certain parameters. A parent, let's say, wouldn't have the right to say, if I sneeze, pull the plug. Yeah, right. Or something to that effect. But a parent could say, I don't want heroic measures. If I'm already at a certain point of decline, I don't want heroic measures to be taken to preserve my life. A parent does have a right to say that to the children, and the children have to adhere to the wishes. Well, if it's clearly contrary to certain halachic parameters, then the children should not listen, right? If a parent says, if I get a certain disease, I want you to take a pillow and smother me until I stop breathing, right? Or I want you to inject a lethal injection into me, that of course you can't listen to a parent. They're basically saying, I want you to murder me. You can't listen to a parent if they go completely against the Torah. But there are areas which are gray, and that requires the direction, that the children should seek out a proper direction. Okay, so va'afal gavda b'shulchan aruch sham b'simin reish nun beis if beis kaimelan de mitzvah l'kayim divrei hameis. So, point number 2. We know that there's a principle in Jewish law called mitzvah l'kayim divrei hamet. There's a mitzvah to fulfill the wishes of the decedent. Yesh ladun, in other words, if a decedent tells his kids, I'm leaving you everything and I want you to do X, Y, and Z. I want you to give 10% of the estate to tzedakah, and the tzedakah that I want you to choose is a Zionistic yeshiva, right? A yeshiva that commemorates Yom HaAtzmaut, right? So he's very explicit in what he wants you to fulfill. He says, Yesh ladun harbe im yesh bazeh mishum pitaron habaya hanal. He says, but that still may not resolve the problem. He says, because the Shulchan Aruch points out that this mitzvah applies when the testator gives the money that he wants to go to yeshiva X, right? He gives it to a custodian or puts it in escrow. Remember that word shlish, which we saw before. At the time of his testament, at the time of his making of the will, he gives over a portion of his estate to an escrow. Uvenidon shalanu hare eno no lishlish. But what if he doesn't? What if he just basically says, "This is my wish"? Then this halacha that the son has to fulfill the wishes of the father do not completely resolve the issue of the yeshiva taking it from the son against his will. Va'od shaharan begitin yud gimel amid aleph kasav depikatanim lo amrinan mitzvah l'kayim divrei hameis. He says, and the Ran says that if the heir is a minor, then he has no mitzvah to fulfill the wishes of the father. The lav b'nei mi'avin mitzvah ninu, because they're not obligated in mitzvahs. And therefore, when the heirs are adults, that's one thing. What if the heirs are minors? How can any wish of the testator be fulfilled against the wishes of the heir, who's a minor, doesn't even have, let's say, even knowledge of what's going on, and it's a form of confiscation of his property. So we'll hold it here. We'll continue.